Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us to discuss HPAI. Today we have state environmental and health officials to provide an update on how the outbreak is impacting Massachusetts, along with recommendations and guidance for the public and livestock and poultry owners. Today I have with me Andrew Vitz, state ornithologist at Mass Wildlife, Ashley Randall, Commissioner at the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources, and Dr. Catherine Brown, State Epidemiologist and State Public Health Veterinarian with the Department of Public Health. We'll start with a brief summary from each of our experts, and then we'll open it up to questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Andrew Vitz at Mass Wildlife.
Thank you. We appreciate you all being here. My name is Andrew Vitz. I'm the state ornithologist with Mass Wildlife. I'd like to start with some background and health and safety concerns regarding recent outbreaks of high pathogenic avian influenza, the H5N1, in wild birds throughout Massachusetts. So the current strain of HPAI arrived in North America via wild birds in late 2021, and we have experienced periodic outbreaks since that time. Although those have been limited in their geographic scale and primarily occurring along our coastal areas. The current outbreak, the one we're seeing today or in the last couple of weeks, the current outbreak in wild birds has primarily impacted central and eastern states as well as eastern Canada. Some evidence from southern Ontario indicate cases are now declining. This current outbreak is the largest in terms of its distribution and the numbers of wild birds that are being impacted in Massachusetts. We do have presumptive positive HPAI testing results from this current outbreak that is primarily affecting geese and swans at a number of locations. Surveillance testing of individual dead birds indicates the virus is widespread in the state among our wild water birds. However, current Massachusetts cases are primarily located from Greater Boston through the southeast portion of the state, with lower numbers of cases in central Massachusetts and the Connecticut River Valley. It is important to understand that both wild and domestic birds can become infected with HPAI. Raptors, waterfowl, and other aquatic birds are most at risk for infection, although any bird species should be considered susceptible to the virus. Some birds infected with HPAI may not show any signs of illness and do not die from the infection, but they can transmit the virus through droppings and other bodily fluids. Wild mammals, especially those that scavenge on wild birds, such as foxes, can also become infected with the virus. While human infections with avian influenza viruses are rare, we urge the public to strictly avoid any contact with wildlife, especially any sick or dead birds or other animals. To ensure safety, we have provided guidance for those who are most likely to come into contact with wild birds, including animal control officers, wildlife rehabilitators, and licensed hunters. We also recommend that dogs and other pets should be leashed and kept away from wildlife. Cats are highly susceptible to the HPAI virus and should be kept indoors. State and federal officials are working with partners to test suspected cases and collaborating with municipalities to safely dispose of dead birds. We encourage the public to report any observations of sick or dead wild birds to Mass Wildlife, especially if you find 5 or more birds at one single location. You can do this using our online form at mass.gov/report birds. Domestic cases should then be reported to MDAR, Mass Department of Agricultural Resources. Now I'd like to turn it over to Commissioner Randall with MDAR.
Thank you, Drew, and good morning. My name is Ashley Randall, and I serve as the Commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources. Since the first case of HPAI was detected in Massachusetts in 2020, MDAR has worked with poultry owners to enhance biosecurity measures to prevent the spread of the virus among domestic birds. Routine HPAI testing is conducted for flock owners, selling birds, or participating in agricultural fairs. With rising positive cases in wild birds, it's crucial for poultry owners to keep their flocks away from wild birds, especially waterfowl. Owners with water bodies should eliminate standing water and restrict access to ponds and streams. Poultry movement should also be limited, and new birds must be isolated for at least a month before joining existing flocks. Owners are advised to reduce foot traffic around their birds and disinfect shared equipment. Biosecurity is incredibly important on farms and for backyard flocks, as we recognize how emotionally and financially devastating this can be for flock owners. Regarding dairy, Massachusetts has consistently tested the milk supply and has achieved 100% negative results for HPAI among licensed dairy farms since we started testing last August. This success is due to collaboration between MDAR, the Department of Public Health, and our licensed dairy farms, who we wish to express our deep gratitude for adhering to best practices to ensure that we have a safe milk supply for all of our consumers. And now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Brown from DPH.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And my name is Dr. Catherine Brown. I am the state epidemiologist and the state public health veterinarian at the Department of Public Health. I want to thank all of you for being here today and helping us keep the public informed about H5N1 avian flu. I want to stress that right now at the Department of Public Health, we feel like awareness is the right approach as opposed to alarm. We know that although the virus is out there in wild birds in Massachusetts, the risk of human infection is low. You've already heard that this avian flu strain has been circulating for many years in the US, and the Department of Public Health has been collaborating very closely with the other state agencies you see here today, and closely following information about H5N1. While the current H5N1 avian flu has had significant impacts on dairy cattle, domestic birds, and wild birds in the US, avian flu viruses very rarely infect humans. Despite 145 million infected domestic birds, 943 infected herds of dairy cattle, and millions of infected wild birds throughout the US, only 67 people have tested positive for H5N1. 24 of them were exposed through contact with infected birds, domestic birds. 40 people were infected through contact with dairy cattle, and 3 additional people were infected with where an exposure source could not be traced despite extensive work. Most of these cases have been very mild, although there has been 1 fatality. There have been no confirmed human cases of H5N1 avian flu in Massachusetts. So let's focus on how people might get exposed to avian flu and what people in Massachusetts can do. Humans, people, are most commonly infected with avian flu if they have direct contact with infected animals or the immediate environments where those infected animals are living. While there have not been any cases of people getting infected just through contact with infected wild birds, DPH is joining our other state agencies in advising people and pets to stay away from sick and dead wild birds. Instead, please make sure you report your observations to Mass Wildlife, as Andrew has already talked about. People who keep backyard birds, chickens, turkeys, ducks, geese, should report signs of illness or death in those birds to the Department of Agricultural Resources, and they will work with you to determine if the birds need to be tested or not. You have actually already heard this, but as a veterinarian, it's important for me to reiterate that domestic cats are very susceptible to this avian flu when they are exposed to it and tend to become seriously ill from the disease. Cats and dogs should be kept from coming into contact with sick or dead birds and should not be fed raw milk, raw pet food, or raw poultry. This is an animal virus right now. While it can occasionally infect humans, it is not mutated in a way where it can infect people easily. And because of that, public health authorities still consider the risk to the general public from the current H5N1 avian flu to be low, but we're all maintaining situational awareness and preparing in the event that those mutations happen. DPH is continually monitoring the virus activity and taking steps as needed. A couple of important things to note. The Department of Public Health's State Public Health Laboratory, as part of routine flu surveillance that we do every year during the winter, we receive a subset of respiratory samples from people to be tested for flu. For any of those that test positive for flu, we do additional testing to determine if it is a seasonal human flu type, which is what we expect to see and what we have been seeing in Massachusetts to date, or if it's an H5 type. And again, so far there have been no H5 identifications in people in Massachusetts. People who have had direct contact with confirmed infected animals may be advised to take Tamiflu to prevent the possibility of illness, and they are monitored for symptoms for 10 days following their exposure. And the Department of Public Health can help arrange testing if they develop symptoms. In closing, just a reminder that our public health advice is for people and pets to stay away from sick and dead animals and to report them to the appropriate state agency. Thanks so much.
So with that, we'll start taking questions. If you could raise your hand, we will start calling on people, so just make sure you unmute. We'll start with Fred.
Hi, Fred Tice with the Plymouth Independent. A question about the flock of domestic birds in Plymouth that was euthanized last week. How many birds were in that flock?
There were a total of 30 birds in the flock.
Thank you.
Mary?
Hello, I'm just wondering if the Trump administration's freeze on federal health agency communications is having any impact on your ability to address this issue.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So, we will continue to work closely with our federal counterparts as appropriate, make sure that we are pushing out the most updated guidance to the public. While the current pause on communication on certain communication from federal governments is disappointing, a 2-week pause is unlikely to result in a significant decrease in our ability to understand and track avian flu in Massachusetts. I will say that DPH has routine communications with other states in the Northeast about many public health concerns, including a standing biweekly meeting that's specifically about avian flu, and that includes both public health and animal health officials. And these communications are helping us maintain situational awareness. And then lastly, I'll just say that part of routine work in public health is working with several different national professional organizations, including the Council of State and Territorial Epidemiologists, Association of Public Health Labs, and others. And they help also support information sharing between different public health agencies. Thank you.
We'll go Jack, then Nancy, Jessica, and then William. So Jack.
Awesome, thank you. This is Jack Lee with 22 News, and we talked a lot about reporting dead birds and things of that variety, but for people who think they may be seeing those symptoms, what's the best way to go about that end of the spectrum?
So just a reminder that it is respiratory virus season, and we are seeing a lot of respiratory virus illness in Massachusetts, including from things like regular seasonal human flu, RSV, COVID, and then, a laundry list of other respiratory viruses. So people who have not had contact with H5N1, with animals with H5N1, should proceed as normal and talk to their healthcare providers about the appropriate medical care. For individuals that have flu-like symptoms, and particularly if they have conjunctivitis, which is, red kind of inflamed eyes, and have had contact with sick or dead animals, it's more important for them to flag that for their healthcare provider. And they can also call the Department of Public Health at our 24/7 line for advice. That number is 617-983-6800.
Okay, Nancy?
Hi, thank you. It's Nancy Cohen from New England Public Media. Do you know how many backyard flocks there are that are permitted in Massachusetts? I understand cities and states do the permitting. And in addition, is the state monitoring backyard flocks at all?
Thank you for the question, Nancy. There are several hundred backyard flocks across the state, and that is tracked at the municipal level. We do work with the municipalities, and we've been working closely with them to issue guidance and to their animal control officers who work most closely and monitor the backyard flocks. And we've also continued to increase our education to both farms and backyard poultry owners so that they're aware of the biosecurity practices that they can put in place to mitigate against the risk of HPAI.
Can I ask just one follow-up question? I think you mentioned that there's an effort to contain the birds so that they don't wander much. Is there any kind of effort to change the way birds are cage-free?
The best guidance for both farms and backyard flock owners is currently to keep their poultry inside because of the risk from the wild bird population. During the cold season from January to March, we typically see the increased cases of HPAI. So right now we've been working with poultry owners to ensure that the poultry are remaining inside because that is the safest way to prevent against the risk of HPAI.
Jessica?
Hi, Jessica from the Patriot Ledger. I was wondering if there's any estimates of how many birds have died this season, like both domestic and wild.
I'll take the wild birds to start off. We don't have a good estimate for the number of wild birds that have died, basically because we know there are a lot out there that don't get reported. In terms of our reporting form, we've had in the vicinity of 500 to 1,000 wild birds being reported. It's a little bit hard to tease that number out just because there's a lot of double reporting or multi-reporting of the same flocks and individuals. So the number, that's kind of a minimum number. We know it's much higher than that. However, just due to the lack of reporting for most of the birds out there.
And with respect to domestic poultry, we have had one flock impacted, which was the 30 birds in Plymouth County.
Great. And just one follow-up to that, particularly about the wild birds. So I'm hearing from people who live along, ponds, lakes in the area where they're seeing raptors and other animals then feeding on dead birds, like the swans and the geese. And they have a little bit of a sense of hopelessness or helplessness. What do? I don't want the eagles to be coming back and eating them. Is that a big concern in terms of the spread of the virus, or is it more, spread bird to bird when they're, alive and congregating on the shores or whatever?
Yeah, first I'll just add to my prior statement there that, for the numbers of birds that I stated, wild birds, 500 to 1,000 that have been reported, those are all kind of suspect cases. Those are not preliminary positive cases or anything like that. Those are suspect given the documentation being collected on the site, like the behavior of the birds, or just finding dead carcasses. In terms of the question regarding raptors, yeah, we're getting a lot of inquiries, particularly around bald eagles and other raptors that have come in and are now foraging on the carcasses. And these birds are at an increased risk for sure. As they consume a lot of that virus through that foraging activity, their exposure is really high, much higher than most of the other birds are experiencing out there. So they're more vulnerable to the high path avian influenza because of that behavior of foraging on carcasses. And we do know that, that it has, killed bald eagles in the past, not just here in Massachusetts, but across the country. Mortalities of eagles have been disproportionately high in terms of the wild bird mortality impacts. So that is definitely a concern. We do not want, we understand that there's a lot of public concern around that, particularly the bald eagles, but any of the raptors. And we certainly share that concern, but we do not want people, trying to help these birds. It's a kind of, we have to wait and see. We do have very robust population of bald eagles and our other raptors by and large. So we are hoping that those robust populations will be able to deal with upticks in the virus that we're seeing now. We certainly have seen that in the prior years where we've had limited outbreaks. We have had documented mortalities of raptors from HPAI, but at the population level, it's been stable. So we're hoping that continues into the future.
Okay, we'll go William, then Sarah, and then Hadley. So William.
Hi, William Von Herf from the Provincetown Independent. How does this outbreak compare in scale and severity to previous outbreaks, both for wild animals and domestic birds? What's changed about the virus to cause this new outbreak?
Yeah, it's definitely for wild birds. It's definitely the biggest outbreak, suspected outbreak, because again, almost all the cases are suspect at this time. But everything's consistent with HPAI, so we're treating it as such. And it's by and large our largest outbreak in terms of the impacts of the number of individual birds and the geographic distribution in the state. We're not sure, what's going on, why we're seeing this bigger outbreak today. The virus certainly changes a lot as viruses do. The analysis of the current virus haven't been completed to date. So there's just a lot of data and information that we have yet to receive. So some of those questions may be answered at a future time. An environmental factor that I think may be playing a role here this winter is we have had high path avian influenza every winter, since it came to North America in wild birds in late 2021. But they've been relatively local. We've had mild winters up until now, the last couple of winters, and this is more of a traditional New England winter. We have less open water out there. Birds are congregating in the areas where there is open water, and that's likely facilitating the spread of the disease. So it may be as simple as the environmental conditions are causing this larger outbreak, or there may also be more to it that we hope to learn about in the future.
Thank you. And if I could just ask one follow-up question. I understand that this outbreak has caused increases in prices for poultry products. Are these price increases expected to continue, and might it impact other dairy and cattle meat?
I'm happy to speak to that. Currently across the country, we know that over 138 million birds have been impacted, domestic birds, since 2022. And last year was a year where we saw a decrease in domestic cases nationally. We are starting to see an increase as of January 1st of this year across the country. And a lot of that is impacting the large commercial operations. And that's where we're seeing the increase in egg prices currently that is impacting consumers' ability to afford eggs. On the dairy side, we do know that pasteurization kills the virus, so the milk supply is safe. and we're not seeing an increase in dairy prices or impacts on the meat side, as both the meat and pasteurized milk are safe to consume.
Thank you both very much.
Sarah.
Hi, I wanted to just ask about the state's policy around if a commercial flock needs to be depopulated. Does a farm have to rely on their own insurance to compensate for that, or what happens there?
Thank you for the question, Sarah. We work very closely with the flock owners. We have not had a depopulation or a detected case in a commercial flock in the state, but we at the department cover the costs for the depopulation through a cooperative agreement with USDA.
Okay. I guess a follow-up to that would be, are we concerned about the USDA support in case that happens if the federal government is walking back? A bunch of stuff.
We have a strong partnership with USDA, and we've also prepared on the state side should there be a lapse in funding, but we are not concerned currently as we have put measures in place within our department and our Division of Animal Health to be able to assist poultry owners.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Hadley from Mass Live. It's my understanding that in the last week of the Biden administration, the CDC awarded millions to Moderna here in Massachusetts in an effort to expedite a bird flu vaccine. Has the state been involved in any conversations around a future vaccine? And what would you say about the current need for one?
Yeah, thanks so much for that question, Hadley. We have not been directly involved with those conversations between the federal government and Moderna, although obviously we are certainly aware of the funding and the requests that went to the company. I think in general, right now, the public health authorities continue to assess the risk to the general public from avian flu as low. And so at this point, there would not be a need for a vaccine. However, it's obviously very important that we be prepared in advance in case we need it. And so, you know, we think this was a smart move to help support vaccine development in case we need it in the future.
So we're gonna take 3 more questions from Mary, Daniel, and Nancy, and then we'll respond to any questions in the chat via written response. So Mary, you wanna go ahead?
Do you think the killer could still be out there?
I survived him. Each of these victims' families deserve justice.
WMUR, investigating the issues that matter to you.
Thank you. I was just wondering if there is any, there's some residents I've spoken to who live around ponds and stuff that have been dealing with this, and they're worried about their well water being contaminated. Are there any concerns about water contamination related to this?
Yeah, thanks. Sorry. Always having to find that mute button, right? Thanks so much for the question. So, you know, it is certainly possible for avian influenza virus to get into surface water, open bodies of water, because there may be birds on it who are actively shedding the virus or through decaying carcasses. Thankfully, chlorine as the most common form of disinfectant used in public water treatment has shown to effectively inactivate the virus, which makes drinking water from those sources safe. In terms of well water, you know, I think as has been highlighted here, this is not a problem that the extent of infected birds is not specific to Massachusetts, and there has been no evidence that well water is serving as a source of infection to people.
Sorry, quick follow-up. If they are living near a pond where there is a lot of this sort of birds dying from the bird flu and it's all in the water there, like, is there a possibility that it could kind of transfer into that well water if they're right nearby?
Mary, I think all I can say to that is that we have not seen that as serving as a risk of exposure to people so far anywhere in the United States.
Thank you so much.
Daniel.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Dan Shammer, Taunton Gazette. Presently in Taunton, numerous presumptive cases have been reported along its biggest lake, Lake Sebacia. It's my understanding that there's presently, I guess, a delay in the collecting of specimens and testing. Can you just go into I guess what the current uh, uh, schedule for testing is? What are some of the factors that are influencing the progression or delay in testing? And when can we expect results for Taunton?
Yeah, in terms of testing wild birds, I think we were able to get a sample or two yesterday out of that water body. The weather conditions have been an impediment at some of these locations. It's just the ice hasn't been deemed to be safe to access carcasses out there. So we've been waiting for improved conditions, improved ice conditions to be able to access birds. They're not all available, even if people are seeing and reporting them. So we are currently working with the staff at Taunton and working on getting those collected. In terms of if that outbreak gets larger, we'll be working with other state partners on a possible, about the possibility of a larger cleanup effort.
And finally, Nancy.
Thank you. Nancy Cohen, New England Public Media. You had said that there aren't a lot of cases in central and western Mass. Do you know how many birds, domestic or wild, have been infected in that part of the state? And also a second question for Andrew, which is, did you say that the bald eagle is the species most at risk of being infected, or are raptors in general most at risk? Thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of the numbers of wild birds in central and western Mass, we do have a couple confirmed cases, or not confirmed, but preliminary positive cases that are waiting that confirmation process at UMass, but the reports of sick and dead birds there has dropped, and we're no longer getting reports in Amherst at UMass. We don't have, a lot of the Central and Connecticut Valley reports are just, coming in the last day or so. Very few have been tested. Most of the cases have been in Boston and through the southeastern portion of the state. So we have more pending testing there. We're working to get additional testing at these other locations that are in central and more western Mass. But overall, the numbers are much lower in terms of the reporting tool numbers that we're documenting in those areas compared to the greater Boston area and the southeastern portion of the state. The question on bald eagles, yeah, bald eagles and, anything that's preying on carcasses or taking sick birds and consuming them are just much more susceptible to the virus. We get, bald eagles are reported a lot because there's a lot of interest in that species. And they are, during the winter months, they get a lot of their food from carcasses. So that's part of their natural behavior. Other raptors do it, but not, generally not to the extent that we see in bald eagles. Turkey vultures, we don't have a lot of turkey vultures around in the winter. There are a few out there, but bald eagles just, they prey on carcasses and carrion as part of their natural history. And so they are disproportionately affected. But any raptor consuming infected prey would fall into that same category.